Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my first update on my experience with the Microsoft Surface Duo 2. Now, I've spent nearly 2 days with this device, and so far I'm really enjoying it. Overall, I think that Microsoft has made a very big jump from the previous generation in terms of improving this device in just about every possible way, at least the consumers pointed to, which is always good. You always want a manufacturer that actually listens, and Microsoft doesn't always do that. But here with the Duo, they absolutely did. So let's start off with what I think they've gotten right so far. First and foremost, we have modern hardware at launch, something that Gen 1 unfortunately did not have. Gen 1 had an old processor, a meager amount of RAM, a single camera, and quite frankly, it fell flat. Software being one of its largest problems. The fact that at the time Android did not support multi-display devices, which now here Android 11 of course does, and that was always part of the big promise of what ultimately would lie in the future of the Duo lineup. And Microsoft essentially remedied the majority of those things. We went from a single camera to 4, now having 3 on the back, which puts it right on par with the majority of smartphones on the market. And I know some of you will say Microsoft didn't need to do that, and in some ways I agree with you. But in the same vein, Microsoft isn't really trying to necessarily please the core customer that loved the Duo last gen. They're trying to broaden adoption. They want more people to see this as something they will actually want to use, and not as a secondary device, but as a primary device. Because the marketplace doesn't really necessarily accommodate a starting price point of $1,500 US as a secondary device. In fact, as much as I enjoy my Z Fold 3, and in the previous generation where we had, that is the Z Fold 2, no dust or water resistance, of course it's really only water resistance that we have now with the 3rd gen, I didn't use it anywhere near water. Yes, raining conditions, I still used it, it was my primary device, but in the event that I was going to a pool or a beach, I always had a water-resistant phone. Now, the majority of people aren't going to want to juggle devices, and I think Microsoft knows that, and that's why they address so many basic issues with basically building out the Surface Duo 2 into being a flagship device on paper, and they've accomplished that. They improved their displays, made them larger, gave them a 90 hertz refresh rate, curved them, which I think was a really good move, which allows for the ability to essentially peek at the edge to see notifications, which doesn't work incredibly well, and I'll show that a little bit later, but it's better than nothing. And that's one of the key issues, I think, with this device, is still not having anything on the front. And I understand what Microsoft is going for. They want to deliver a product unlike any other on the market, and they've done that. The question is whether it will survive, regardless of the fact that, again, there are core users out there that love this thing, and I respect and understand that, but to get widespread adoption, even enough to keep it going for a 3rd or 4th generation, this, I think, may have been their biggest faux pas. And I say that because, this is something that many manufacturers try and they learn the hard way. And because in practical application, using this as a daily driver, opening it and closing it constantly to do everything isn't something that I would say is impossible or unbearable. It's just not ideal. And again, for broad adoption, which is what Microsoft is looking for, I mean, that's what improving all of the internals with the new Snapdragon 888, CPU, 8 gigs of RAM as opposed to 6, battery life that at least appears to be on par with last gen in spite of all of the technological improvements, and there are quite a few. I just don't know if it's enough still. Now, I think it's an incredibly cool device, just like Gen 1. I think that it's obvious there is nothing on the market that is quite like it. It is still a little bit wide for at least my use, and for some of you, I imagine you're going to be in the same boat, and I'm talking about when it's one-handed. A lot of people are really bothered by the fact that now that we have a camera module, it can't close flush. I'm actually not that bothered by that. In fact, that's really not a major concern for me. I think the inability to use the camera array without it being completely open is a bigger issue, but not for me. I'm just talking about for users in general. I actually think having it open when shooting images is incredibly beneficial. We're seeing some of the bugs right there, right now. And this is something that, goes without saying. That shouldn't have launched like that. We should have gotten clearly the camera on one side, the gallery on the other. And this is one of those things where, again, it's quite unpredictable as to what bug will present itself. Sometimes it's fine, sometimes it's not. Now it's working. And look, someone can blame me. I don't really care. The fact of the matter is that when it comes to software implementation, I expect a little bit more from Microsoft. They've had a year to revise this and work on it, and it seems like, again, as I've discussed through the course of this video, they've thrown the kitchen sink at this thing when it comes to hardware. But it's not like a savings was passed on to consumers. The price of the device went up. We went to a $1,500 starting price point for 128 gigs of internal storage. Now, I'm not complaining about the price point, but a point I will make is that we're in a market, more than a year into a pandemic, where the majority of manufacturers are trying to lower prices. The Z Fold series price went down. iPhone price went down. And before you get upset that I'm mentioning those devices, because you'll tell me this is nothing like those devices, regardless of the fact that this has two displays, as I already stated, if you know anything about business, Microsoft is trying to capture those customers. They're not saying we don't care about them. They want them. They want everybody. And why wouldn't they? They want this device to be a success, and so do I. So, again, in a market where high-end tech has, in some areas, at least smartphones, the profit margins have been peeled back, Microsoft said, look, we'll address every single thing that has been complained about, but we're not paying for it. We're going to bump that price up because we have to have a way to offset the fact that we've got new costs with the camera, we've got new costs with the displays, we've got new costs with the RAM, we've got new costs with the CPU. I understand that, but to do that on a device that fell as hard as it did in Gen 1 is a really risky gamble. Now, Microsoft may be looking at this like, well, if on Black Friday it's already been reduced by $300 or $400, and if in 6 months it's at half price, it really doesn't matter. And maybe that is where they're coming from. I don't know. That's classically what the Surface line of products tends to go through, no matter how good or bad they are in each respective iteration. So, I think they've done a really good job with this. I think the camera application is one of the best examples. Of course, Outlook also of dual screen use. And some people will say this is the only device that can truly multitask because you have two independent displays that are really usable. Unlike on my Z Fold 3, where once that 7+ inch display gets cut in half, you have very narrow screens. But I personally disagree. And that's not because I inherently favor the Z Fold 3 over this. It's because they are usable, and that's just a matter of fact. Now, this would have better practical application if there was wider or broader support for apps using dual screen. We're not there yet. Will we be there eventually? I would like to think so. I think that especially with the inherent shift towards ARM CPUs, it's going to happen, but this is still in its infancy. So Microsoft has improved a broad array of things here, and as I mentioned, all of these improvements you would think would have taken a hit on battery life, but it seems like battery life is right where it was. And we now have 5G, which is another thing that was, for me personally, didn't matter, but for the large-scale market at the time was just, getting by. Just getting by. Now it's much harder to make that argument in 2021 when the majority of U.S. markets have some form of 5G connectivity. I mean, there's even some level of it now where I live. So not major markets alone. So, the sum of the parts here are pretty good. I mean, overall, by the way, it is a really good phone. Audio's improved. The displays, as I've mentioned, are better than they were. The 90 hertz refresh rate I really feel is a sweet spot. I think 120 has been, just a marketing gimmick. But 90 hertz refresh rates on displays is nothing new in smartphones. I mean, we can go back to the Razr phone, right? It had it. It was a flop. Of course, I'm not comparing it, but I thought that was a really good starting point that manufacturers abandoned simply because, Apple pushed the needle to 120 and Samsung followed suit. And there's nothing wrong with that. The 90 hertz is one area where I think Microsoft did the right thing because they looked at battery life, I'm assuming, or it could have just been costs, and they made a decision. Now, it is odd that you can't change the refresh rate in the software. I'm sure that's something that Microsoft will address over time because getting more battery life out of this, switching down to 60, for some of you, is going to be a better way to go. But again, build quality, usability, they're all excellent, but the software bugs, that's something that I can't excuse Microsoft on. I couldn't in Gen 1. I'm certainly not going to do it here when they've had another generation to work on it. So a lot of things have been improved. Overall stability is better, but it's still not as good as it should be. Now, I'm sure that's going to be addressed over time with updates. Another thing people are complaining about incessantly is that, besides the fact that it can't open flush, is that the camera bump makes it so that if you place it down, it wobbles. I mean, these are, fickle complaints at best. There are no smartphones anymore that are flagship, whether they're single, dual screen, or folding, that really can sit flush on a surface. So I understand people are basically saying it undoes the clamshell hinge design of being able to sit at a 90 degree and enjoy that. I don't agree with that. Clearly, you can use it like this and you're fine. I don't really see the difference. And anyway, that's the way you would want to use it, so the cameras are still able to shoot if in the event you need to use them. This complaint about wanting to use it this way, I think, is stupid. I really don't even understand that. So I'm totally okay with what Microsoft has done there. Again, I think they've come a long way from Gen 1. The issues we're still grappling with, though, are Gen 1 problems, ironically, because it's software, and then, of course, the fact that we don't have any good way to see notifications without opening the phone. Now, some people will say that, this peak feature, which you can see right now, the time, is great, and it solves the problem. And look, it's a step in the right direction. Having no way to see anything is terrible, in my opinion. It's just not, this isn't a matter of whether or not you understand the concept Microsoft is going for. It's whether or not you're sane. Because there's no way that, in my mind, anyone would argue that the design aesthetic, the design language, is more important than functionality. So form, generally follows function. Here it does not. And if you can't see a notification without opening this, it's a killer. And that's what Gen 1 was. So we've taken a step in the right direction by having some form, but how good are your eyes? I mean, I wear glasses that correct my vision. I can see this perfectly, but countless people have complained that this is simply not large enough, not dynamic enough, and I get it. So whether or not this is going to satisfy you when it comes to the ability to see notifications is going to be on a case-by-case basis. I don't think it's located in the best place, I will say that, because inherently you're going to have to actually pick up your phone or angle it or look at it a certain way, which you may as well just open it at that point. That's my point of view on this. You're better off opening the device. Another thing that I've heard as a common complaint, again, is really about just how annoying it may or may not be to use this as a daily driver. And again, if you don't see yourself using this as a daily driver, you shouldn't be. That's obvious. I mean, I feel like it's obvious, but I know for a lot of you, it's not obvious. So it's something to be aware of. I think that it can be your daily driver, but you better make sure you're in love with it. And I think that's really important to making a decision on a $1,500 device. Now, instantly saying this will be secondary, look, if you're going to use this as a secondary, I don't see any reason why you'll have a problem with it. You'll probably really enjoy it. It's unique, and again, the only device of its kind. It does pick up fingerprints like crazy, which I wish we could have had a matte finish, but I think build quality here is better than Gen 1. At least it appears to be. How well it'll hold up over time, I'm not exactly sure. I do wish this was a matte finish, but again, I think Microsoft, from a hardware perspective, has done really well. It's more, ironically, about software improving. And some people who hate Windows will, insert their stupid jokes here about, well, Windows isn't great to begin with. And, tell that to the world, because that's what runs the world, not anything from Apple. So, you have to understand that, they are grappling with a very big learning curve here on coming back to a world that they abandoned. And I think they've done a really good job. I just don't know what adoption is going to be like. I mean, they've made the hardware attractive enough. In fact, they've put design language in front of functionality. So I think this needs to change. And other manufacturers, people will again cry, about this when I say this, but, the Fold and the Flip are very good examples of, as well as the Razer, of respective manufacturers realizing that consumers want a bigger front display. And Microsoft, I feel like, should have done something this gen. Now, if they're going to make another device altogether, kudos to them on hopefully launching something that will be even more friendly to regular consumers because, the price point I don't think is scaring people away. It's practicality that is. And, again, people will continue to say they're missing the point. Microsoft doesn't want anyone missing the point. You better believe it. They're not trying to make this just for one specific slice of consumer. That's not the idea. And if you think it is, you're fooling yourself. Microsoft wants broad adoption. And I'll keep hitting that nail over and over again because if they don't pull this off, I'll be sad personally because this device will not exist anymore. I mean, why do you think the Neo never launched? It's not a phone, but we never ended up seeing the Neo. It's over 2 years. I haven't heard a word. I don't think you have either. Hopefully they didn't scrap it all together because I was very excited about that product as well. But, the cameras here aren't the best on the market, but they are absolutely excellent compared to the one camera last gen. As I already stated, I'm not incredibly bothered by the fact that, I can't shoot images one-handed. I mean, when I use my Fold, it's a little bit more dynamic, obviously, because I can use the front screen or open it up, so I have the best of both worlds. Here, being limited isn't a great thing, but I don't think it's a big deal. The last point I'm going to make in today's update is about the spanning across the two displays, because a lot of people are complaining, people who are reviewing the device, regular owners, that even though we've got curved displays now, which I think was a really smart design choice in improving functionality and making it more seamless looking, as well as making the displays larger and a little bit more narrow, eliminating more bezel, I really don't think that's something a lot of people care about. So a lot of people have been talking about that if they span any kind of app, web browser, video across this, that, oh, wait a minute, something's lost in the middle. Of course something's lost in the middle. This is not a single display. I think it's a stupid critique. I don't think it really is relevant or important. I'm not saying that Microsoft does not pitch this as being somewhat of a tablet once it's open. They do. But anyone who's fixated on the fact that when they span something across these two displays, there's a break in the middle, I don't know what to tell you. Did you miss the fact that it's a two-display device, a clamshell that has a break in the middle? I mean, that shouldn't be surprising. So when I hear that sort of critique, I don't put that in the same boat as, the camera bump being a little bit obnoxious when it comes to usability, because that's a real complaint. This idea with spanning, that was there in Gen 1. It's here again in Gen 2. And that's just ignoring the fact that this is not a folding device. It's a clamshell with two displays. So I don't really understand that. And again, I know Microsoft has pitched it as really transforming into a tablet. That's a bit of crap. It's not a tablet. It's meant to be obviously a multitasking smartphone unlike any other. And look, with the pen support and what ultimately should be the ability with this device, we may get there one day. In my 2 days, we're not there yet. So I really like it. It is not the best of breed from their Surface launch. It is the most fingerprint susceptible of the Surface launch here in 2021. And I think it has a bright future. That's if there is any level of adoption. And I'm not sure yet here in 2021 if people are going to jump on this. This is not like the Surface Pro 8 where I feel like they hit it out of the park. Yes, they raised prices, but they made a dynamically better product. And now with Android app support coming in Windows 11, Surface Pro 8 may be the game changer that it has always been envisioned to be. We're a long way from that here with the Duo. So while on paper the Duo checks every box to be at its price point and compete with top, not just flagship material, but the most innovative phones on the market here in 2021, the software, again, ironically, I think it's the third, maybe the fourth time I've said it, is still what I think is the biggest thing holding this back. Not even the usability factor that I've mentioned over and over again, whether it is about shooting with the cameras or, schmucks thinking that they should span the screen seamlessly, even though there's a break in it. And then there's this, palmability. I don't care about the weight of the device. It got a little bit heavier. That's not an issue for me at all. I'm a Z Fold user, every generation pretty much, but lifer on Gen 2 and Gen 3, which I still have here in-house. So this is not too heavy, but in terms of how large it is, pocketability is a major issue. I don't carry a man purse, so there's no merce to slide this into. Could it go in a gear bag? Of course it can, but I don't walk around with a gear bag. So that's another issue. Pocketability has to be something that people are going to think about. And yeah, you can get a case, you'll worry less. But it's just, these are real world things that we have to think about. So while so many people in the comments are sure to shout, and there have been many of you, people need to understand who this is for. I will reiterate, you need to understand that if this doesn't get broad adoption, this will be the last generation of the Duo. So let's hope that rather than shouting about people not understanding what it's designed to do, that people actually enjoy it, like it enough to buy it, and give Microsoft a reason to make round 3. But that wraps things up for my first update. It's a really nice device, arguably one of the nicest here in 2021. We're going to see whether or not it's got the chops. I'm hoping we see some software updates really soon. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe and please stay safe. Later.